Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Philosophy of the World. My name is Jacob, and today we're going to be going over episode 1 of a series titled A Study of Character and God. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Arche and Principle. So, we've got this word God, and it's an important word for obvious reasons. And it's unfortunate because we seem to be separated, torn apart, and divided by this word over what it means, if there is a God, if there isn't a God, who or what God is. And this isn't a good thing. But I actually think it's counter to what the word God even means, because I believe God is that which brings us together, not what divides us. And to try and show this or to make that case, I'm going to be going through the definitions of these words, arche and principle, which have been used traditionally as synonyms for God. And along the way, I hope to start to give a preliminary answer as to these two questions. Where do we come from and why are we here? What is the beginning and end of all things? And of course, God is the answer to those questions. So when we look at the definitions of these words, arche and principle, we notice, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to pull this out of the two words. We notice a metaphor that God is like a king and that has his rule over creation. And this is a metaphor that has been employed almost universally, cross-culturally. Every religion seems to understand that God is something of a king who has dominion over reality. And we're going to try and understand that today. And so, to get right into it, God is the creator, meaning God is the author, the originator, the founder, all right? And we can understand this as like, well, before creation, there was only God, and acting as a causal agent, God brought forth creation, and here we are within it. So, as the author, the originator, the founder, this means he's the source and origin of all things, the beginning. And we've just said that. But the question is how? How exactly is God the source and origin? Well, when we look at these two words closely, we see that origin means to arise, and source means to rule up from below. And with that, we're given a nice image of what it might look like for creation to come into being in the first place. And there's two sorts of elements to that. There's the below, the beneath, the under part, and then this arising up out of that. And so we'll be playing with that imagery in just a bit. But for now, we're curious about what the heck it means to rule up from below. What does it mean to rule? Because that's going to be key to everything. Well, to rule means to control or guide, direct, to command, to govern, to steer. And it also has an even further notion tied to it, meaning to conform to a pattern. And you might think, well, what the heck does controlling, guiding, and directing have to do with conforming to a pattern? But when we look at the word principle, we can make sense of this quite easily. One of the etymologies of principle is primus caput, meaning the first head. And head is an important notion here because when you think about it, the head is that part of your body which governs all the other parts of your body. It's where you make decisions. It's where you make judgments of right and wrong, of what you should and shouldn't do. So the head rules the body, right? Now, the conforming to a pattern aspect comes into play when you think, well, the body has to conform to the rule of the head. It has to do what the head says. Or it's out of alignment, something like that. It's not in tune with the head. When you can think of this at a higher level of abstraction, say, in terms of the head of a business or the head of a corporation or an organization, the head honcho, the boss, the person who's in charge. They're in charge of the company, which means they get to determine how they want the company to be ran. They have rule over it. They get to set the laws. And the employees or the team members must either conform to that rule. They either do as the boss wants them to do, or they don't, and they risk getting punished, or even worse, fired in this case. They're actually expelled from the body. And it's this notion of this idea of the head having rule and the body needing to conform to that rule that we're going to understand how God is a king. And we can supplement this understanding with the word arche, which also means to start, source and origin, and to rule, and somehow those things are tied together. And it comes from a sense of beginning to fit together. And what this is speaking to is this notion that rule not only puts people in formation, brings them together, but things in general together, which is to say, being a part of the same body means you're conforming to the same rule. Okay, so with that, we're going to try and envision what this might look like at the level of a king and his kingdom. So you could imagine several warring tribes spread out from each other, all fighting each other. And they're fighting with each other precisely because they don't all have the same leader, right? Well, this is a state of anarchy. It's leaderlessness, lawlessness, a broken, fragmented, chaotic, disorderly, and scattered, disorganized mess that is, for all intents and purposes, a nothing. They're not getting anything done. They're not progressing. They're not evolving. They're not getting anywhere because they're not working together. They're not within the same body under the same leader. This is not an ideal state. And another word that's helpful here is that they don't have a standard. There's no common rule under which to follow. And so they're killing each other needlessly. But you could imagine now that all of a sudden within this fragmented mess, uh, somebody arises through the ranks and who has the kind of character that people like this person and they start to follow him. And he gets enough power to where he says, I'm going to institute my rule. And he sets boundaries, which are very similar to city walls. The city walls say that within the city, you have to act in accordance with the ruler of the city, how the city is governed. And if you don't conform to how that city is governed, then you will be expelled from the city. You will be kicked out of the city. Now we just put people in jail. But the city walls were there to keep the intruders, the people who were chaotic and wanted to mess everything up, out of the city. Well, as soon as this person institutes the rule and sets boundaries, that rule provides uh, something for the people to conform to, a standard that the people can come together under, that they all share in common. And that is necessary for a society to arise. The rule of the king is necessary for the society to arise. And it's this idea, this reality, that we're going to use as a metaphor for how God brings creation into being. And so God, as a king, The metaphor works something like this, where the warring tribes, the anarchy, you could say, is a metaphor for the nothing before space and time, nothing being impossible to grasp, obviously. But to follow through with the metaphor, it's like you have to say, well, in the beginning of time, God institutes his rule. He set the boundaries. He says, within these walls, I want things to be ran this way. And as a result, create whatever the nothing that was there, what you might say is potential. We'll get into that. It's a bit sticky, but we'll try and sort that out. It gives that nothingness something to conform to, and thus creation arises as a result. And in order, if that doesn't really make, if you can't find the intuitive connection within yourself there, just think on it for a bit, and it'll come eventually. But I'm gonna have to move along now. So God is the creator, and now we can understand this as saying, well, God's rule provides the necessary condition for creation itself to arise. And if this is true, what that means is that existence itself, creation, being, whatever you want to call it, reality, is contingent on God's rule, meaning it is dependent on it for continuation. And you can think of this in terms of a river. You know, a river has a source, an origin. And if you get rid of that source, then the river dries up. Well, the same goes for creation. If you get rid of God's rule, then creation dries up, so to speak. And this speaks to a philosophical idea known as emanation, which means to flow out. And in this case, creation flows out of God's rule. And here's an image of that. You have God up above, and his rule rains down onto the below. All right? So, it follows that creation, for it to arise in the first place, must move in accordance with that rule, aka it has to conform to that pattern. And as a result, it emerges up out of the below, out of the nothing, you could say, and becomes something, right? And this will bring us into an even further conversation about how mindful creatures, creatures such as ourselves, conscious creatures, have to try to act in accordance with God's rule. We have to try to conform. It takes effort and attempts to conform to God's rule. We're not perfect. Whereas mindless matter, the rocks and rivers and um, all that stuff, must necessarily act in accordance with his rule, or what a scientist might call the laws of physics, which is just a synonym for God's rule. Now, to the degree that creation and the mindful creatures within it are oriented, or I should say, moving in accordance with God's rule, is equal to the degree, I hope that makes sense, to the degree that we're oriented towards God. So God institutes his rule, and we have to follow it, follow the rules, right? And think about this in terms of a game. When you're playing a game, what is the goal of the game? The goal of the game is to win. Well, how do you win, right? Winning is the end of the game. Once you win, the game ends. Well, how do you win? By following the rules. You have to play by the rules. That's how you truly win. And so this speaks to the point and the purpose and the reason for us being here is to act in accordance with God's rules, uh, so that we might win, so to speak. So to the degree that we're capable of doing that, then what happens is as creation arises, it begins to take on the structure. It builds up in accordance with that rule, creating what is known as the hierarchy, right? The holy rule, the holy order. So if something is acting in accordance with God's rules, that means it's a part of the hierarchy. It's a part of the holy rule, the holy order. It's where it's supposed to be. It's properly placed. It's organized well. Well, when we turn our eyes uh, onto this hierarchy, onto creation, we notice that there are various levels of what you might say study, various levels of analysis. And just to name a few, this isn't exhaustive, but you have the quantum, the atomic, the molecular, the organic, the societal levels. And each one is organized properly in place, and they all build on top of each other, and they're integrated and complex. So, with that, we're going to probably devote a couple episodes to both of those topics. The one dealing with how there's mindful creatures that have to try and act in accordance with creation versus mindless matter, which just necessarily does. And then the idea of the hierarchy with multiple levels of study and how they integrate and the complexity they're involved in how all that works or looks. So, but for now, I want to kind of summarize the most important parts about what has been stated in this, and to tie it back to the what I said at the very beginning, that God is that which brings us all together. It's what's supposed to unite us, right? So His rule, God's rule, is what brings creation together and conforms to His standard, right? And when if we all follow the same God, that necessarily means that we all come together. So I hope that's clear. I hope that idea is clear there. Now, when we go to look at a question like where do we come from, what's the source and origin, we can now understand that as to say that like as a king, he establishes or institutes his golden rule, and it emanates and flows out from him, which then leads us to the question, why are we here? What is the point and purpose and reason? And the reason is, as I said before, is that creation rises to conform to that rule, that our reason for living is that we're supposed to conform to God's rule and that we serve God. And so thinking back to a king, the the king says you get to live within my kingdom and you get to flourish in the city, but in return, you have to pay allegiance to me. You have to follow me, which speaks back to that following the rules. And doing so brings you to the end, winning the game, so to speak. I keep saying so to speak because it's all metaphorical. But um, with that, to the degree that we do conform, then we rise up. That's how creation comes into existence, is God's rule flows out from him, and creation has to arise up and conform to meet it. And I know that's very preliminary and not as specific or exact as I could make it, but I've tried my best. It's very complex. It's hard to talk about, and this took me quite a while to get to. And I hope that in your own just thinking day to day, you might spend some time to kind of grapple with what I'm saying here so that it makes more sense. I'm sorry that I wasn't so clear as I could have been, but as I go along with these videos, I hope to make it more and more clear. And so that's episode 1. I hope that was worth something for you. I hope it was worth watching. And I'm sorry if it wasn't as good as it could have been. But thanks again for watching. Please leave a comment, ridicule me, give me some criticism if you would. Tell me what you'd like to see. Maybe some points that I could clarify even further. If you could just let me know what those points are, please do it. And with that, till next time, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Again, I don't deserve the attention, but anyways, thank you.